Hello everyone. In this video we will be looking at another real world use case of Flow Designer. In the first video of real world use case we focused on when an error occurs what to do. In this video we will focus on preventing any integration error from happening through mid servers. My name is Hardit Singh, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel and don't forget to hit that like button. So we will be covering all of these topics. What is the use case? What is a mid server cluster, because it's related to the use case which we will be discussing. We will be then discussing the logic of the flow, and finally we will see a demo. If you want to jump to any of these topics directly, the links are provided in the description. So what is the use case? So as a developer, I want to check if at least one of my mid servers is up in the mid server cluster so that my integration doesn't fail and the unavailability error is handled properly. For example, you have set up an integration in your flow which is using a mid server, and if that mid server goes down for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or even a minute, maybe it's restarting and your flow kicks off at that moment, then the flow will definitely throw an error. So we will be looking at preventing this integration error from happening because your mid servers were down. There are two techniques which we'll be talking about. One is called the mid server cluster, and then how to write a logic in your flow to prevent that error from happening. So what is a mid server cluster? So a group of mid servers is called a mid server cluster. So if you are setting up a one-to-many relationship or creating a group of mid servers, that is called a mid server cluster. How is it useful? So for example, if you have set up an integration, instead of using a single mid server, you can use a mid server cluster which will have maybe 5, 10 or 15 mid servers under that. So that integration will actually check for which of the mid servers is up, and then it will use one of them. However, if all of them are down, then it's a different story. But it's not a high probability that if you have 5 or 10 mid servers in your mid server cluster, all of them will be down on and all of them will be restarting until they are in the same server. So there are two types of mid server clusters. One is the load balancing. They automatically balance work between each mid server to improve stability and performance. So there is a logic written behind the scenes to balance the work between all the mid servers for load balancing. Second is the failover. So they have a configured order used to determine which mid server to use next if a failure occurs. So you can have these two types of mid server clusters in your environment. One thing you need to ensure that all the mid servers under this cluster should have the same capabilities, same roles, so that if they are used, they are able to do that action or they have the permissions to do that action. So this is the first way how we can prevent an integration error from happening if your one mid server is down, if you have dependency only on one mid server. So you can go ahead and use mid server cluster. Now we will be discussing the second way where we will be implementing that logic in a subflow, and then we will be using that subflow in the actual flow. So we will create a kind of subflow which can be used by any of the flow developers or ServiceNow developers, and they can easily integrate that subflow into their flow. So it will have high reusability and it will be according to the best practices of ServiceNow. The flow will be calling a subflow by sending some inputs, and then subflow will return the output that if any of the mid servers is up or not in the cluster, and then accordingly it will run the next steps in the flow. You might be knowing that the subflow accepts inputs and sends the output back, and if you are not sure, please do check out my video on subflow where I have discussed this in depth, which is on the top right corner and in the description as well. So these are the three tables which will be involved while we are creating that subflow. The first one is the mid server. You might be aware of about what are mid servers. So ECC underscore agent, that's the backend name. Similarly, mid server cluster. And then finally, we will be using a table called mid server cluster agent. So this is a many to many relationship table which will be storing relationships between mid servers and mid server cluster. So I will be taking you through all of these tables one by one in ServiceNow so you have an idea what we are trying to build. So let's go to ServiceNow to check out these tables. So right now I'm in the ECC underscore agent table, that's the mid servers table, and we have set up one of the mid servers called demo mid server, And if you see the status of this, it's showing us up because I have actually hard coded the value of status as up. So if you are aware about myth servers, if a myth server is properly functioning, it should be validated as yes, and the status obviously should be up. But for the demo purpose, I have hard coded the status as up. However, we cannot change the validated as no because it's a read only field. We can do it from the backend, but it's of no use because there is no actual myth server in the backend. Next is the myth server cluster table. So again, under myth server, we will have this clusters. I will click on this. And if you see, I have set up one myth server cluster also called demo cluster 1. And under that, we have this myth server, which I showed you a second ago, demo myth server 1. And I've made the type as load balance. You can make it as failover. It's up to you. So under this cluster, right now we have only one myth server. You can go ahead and add as many as you want. And then the third table is the table which is storing relationships between these two myth server and the cluster. So for that, I will click on this I button and open this record, and it will directly take me to that table. If you see the table name as ECC agent member M2M. So here the relationship is stored between these two tables, and you see the myth server field is a reference field and even the cluster field is a reference field. So we are storing the relationship, and additionally these two are the reference field. So which will help us in navigating the status of the myth server when we are trying to query in the flow designer. Now we will see the logic of the subflow. So it will accept the input as cluster name, which is the reference field of the cluster table. We will have an input of the cluster table, which will allow users to pass their myth server cluster name, and it will make it more reusable. So for example, person A is using cluster number 1, they will pass that as input. If a person B is using cluster 2, they will pass cluster B. So this will make this subflow more reusable. The output of the subflow would be the cluster status, which will pass back the status of any of the myth server if they are up or down. And if they are up, it will return the pass value, or if all the myth servers under that myth server cluster are down, it will return failed. After this, we will be querying the M2M table, which is myth server cluster agent table, and we will use the condition as the cluster name which we had in inputs. So it will query all the records in the many to many table with the cluster name, and then we will iterate through all the records with the cluster name. Again, we are iterating through a loop, and then if any of the myth servers under that cluster is up, we will set the output variable cluster status as passed, and we will end the subflow at that moment because we know at least one myth server is up in the cluster and we are okay to go with the integration ahead. So this is a simple logic of the subflow, and now we will see it in action in ServiceNow. We will go ahead and build it, and then we will test it as well. So let's go to ServiceNow. We will now open the flow designer in ServiceNow, and we will create a new subflow by clicking on create new and subflow, and we will write the name of the subflow as maybe demo myth server check. I would highly recommend you writing subflow annotation in your client instances because it will help other users to know what it is about, what are the inputs and what they can expect as the output, and click on submit. Now we will be creating an input as we had discussed, which would be the cluster name from the cluster table. So I would say here cluster name, and here I will choose the type as reference and then ECC underscore agent underscore cluster. So this is the table name myth server cluster. So I will make it mandatory as well. And then we will give the output as myth server status or maybe the cluster status. So it will tell us whether any of the myth servers in the cluster is up or not. And I will keep this as string field. I'll click on done. And now we will write the logic in the actions. I'll click here. And my first step would be to initialize the value of the output. So I will make it as failure in the first step. So for that, I will search here, assign subflow outputs, and then I will give the value as failure. So in this dropdown, only one value would be shown called cluster status, and I will give as failure, and I'll click on done. And in the next step, I will be looking up all the records from the M2M table or many to many relationship table. For that, I will use this action called lookup records. and I will select this, and I will have to give the table name here, which is ECC underscore agent underscore cluster underscore member underscore m2m. So this is the table, and then we will have a condition here, and in the condition we will choose all the records which have the cluster name as the input. Here I will drag and drop this cluster name, and now it will give me all the records in this m2m table with the cluster name. If there are 10 mid servers in a cluster, it will give me back all those 10 records. So I'll click on done, and in the next step we will be running a for each loop. And if you don't know about loops in Flow Designer, please check out my video on the loops as well. So I'll click on for each, and I will iterate through all the records in the mid server cluster agent table. So I'll just drag and drop this here and click on done. And now in the logic, we will be checking if any of the mid servers is up using the if statement. So I can maybe give a label, check the status of the mid servers. And here I will go down, and in the for each loop I will expand the record and then expand the mid server record, so it's kind of dot walking. And then I will look for the status field, and I will drag and drop the status, and I will make it as is, and I will put the value as up. So if any mid server is up, it will be true. I would highly recommend having another condition called and then is status validated, yes or no. I will not be using that because none of mid servers are set up in my environment, but you would definitely want to use that. The mid server should be validated as well. I will click on done, and if any of the mid server is up, we will again set the value of the output variable. So I will search for assign subflow outputs, and I will select the output variable from this drop down, and I will make it as passed. And as soon as it is found that any mid server is up, I will end this subflow using this flow logic, and I will search for end subflow. Another statement which I would also like to add is to have a wait time in this loop as well. So for example, it checked the status of first mid server, and it, for example, and if the status was down and not up and it was not valid or anything, we can have some wait time. It allows the system to restart the mid server, or whether it is in error, it allows the support team to restart the mid servers again. So you will have some time in your subflow to wait and allow other teams or mid server itself to restart that. So I will add the flow logic here, and I will give the wait time maybe for 1 minute as of now, but you can have as much as you want, maybe 1 hour, 30 minutes, or depends on your requirement. I will click on done, and I will publish this subflow. So as we had initiated the value of this output as failure, if no mid server was passed or no mid server was up, it will return the value of failure. Otherwise, it will return the value of passed. So our subflow is ready now. Now we will create a new flow to test this subflow. Maybe I will give the name as demo flow mid server check. I will change it to run as system user, and I will click on submit. And I will give the trigger as service catalog. Here we will be using a service catalog to test that, and I'll click on done. And in the first step itself, we will be checking the mid server status quickly. So for that, I will be clicking on subflow, and I will search for my subflow which we had created, demo mid server check. And here, if you remember, we had a mandatory input called the cluster name. So we will select the demo cluster one. In your case, you might be seeing more values if you had set up mid server clusters in your environment. So you have to select the one which you will be using in this flow and click done. And in the next step, we will be checking the output of the subflow. For that, I will use the if logic, and maybe I'll write the label check the status of mid server. And from here, I will drag and drop this output, and then maybe I will say is, and then is failure. So if the condition of the status is failure, then we will be triggering maybe an error handling flow and ending this flow as well, so that it errors out gracefully and the flow doesn't hang in there forever. So I will be using a subflow called generic error handling, which we built in the previous video. And when selected, I have to give the rhythm number here. So I will use this rhythm number on the record and click on done, and I will end this flow as well, end flow. And if any of the myth server is up, it will not go into this if logic and it will go to the next step. And in the next step, maybe we will update the rhythm work nodes. So maybe let's update the record. So update record, and then we will drag and drop the rhythm record from here, and we will update the work nodes. At least one myth server was up, and I will click on done, and I will activate this flow now, and we will quickly test this in a catalog item. So for that, I will go back to the main menu and I will type maintain items, and then I will search for a catalog item which I had created called demo catalog item, and I will update the name of the flow here. I will go to the process engine and I will update the name as demo flow mid server check. This is the one which we just created. I will save this and I will try it. So now one of the mid server which is up, it should actually update the rhythm record with the string which we had given. So I will click on try it and click on order now. I will go to this request which was just created and scroll down and go to the rhythm, and it says at least one mid server was up. So my flow and subflow ran successfully and they said at least one mid server was up, and we are okay to go with the integration ahead which you will be building in your flows. Now let's do the negative testing as well, where we will go to the mid server and actually change the status to maybe down. Okay, so I will go here and update the status of this to down and click on OK. I will again go to catalog item and then try it and click on order now, and it will create a rhythm for us. And now if you remember, we had a wait time of 1 minute, so it will at least wait for 1 minute to check the next record. So I will go to requested record, and after that I will go to the rhythm. So I'll click on this RITM and maybe I will go to the flow context. So right now if we see, the work notes haven't been updated. Let's check out the context. So it is still waiting in the subflow. So I will click here and open the context of the subflow as well. So it says waiting here, so we will give it another minute to run. So the first record which it actually checked was not up and it was down because we had done that. Now it is still waiting for 1 minute, and after 1 minute it will again check and it will find no records, and then it will return failure of the subflow by using this output. So I will just quickly refresh this, and now it has been updated and completed after 1 minute, and you would see the timer was completed and the if logic wasn't run, the value would have been initialized as failure here. So we will go to our flow context again and refresh this, and it says it has been completed, and the if logic has ran here and it says failure equal to failure. So we had received failure from the subflow, and it will trigger the generic error handling subflow which we had created. And if I go into the context of this generic error handling flow, we would see actually an incident which would have been created. So if I scroll down here, this is the incident number which was created. And if you remember from my previous video, this rhythm would have been also closed using this first step of this subflow, and this rhythm would have been closed as well. If we go back to my rhythm, it should be updated here. So you see the status has been changed to closed incomplete, and an error occurred in the flow. Please connect with the help desk. And if I search for this incident as well, which was just created, and search here, we would see an incident was created using this rhythm number. So it's easier for the service desk team to look into in what rhythm the error was raised. If we go back to our flow context again, here you would see the status of the flow has also been ended. So it is right now completed. it is not errored out or it is not hanging in there and nobody knows what's going on. So it's good for the end users, the developers and the service desk team that there was something which happened, but we know what happened. An incident was raised, means servers were down and all those things. I think this video would be helpful for each and everyone who are implementing integration in their flows, and it can prevent lot of errors from happening or maybe lot of unexpected errors from happening, and the flow will not keep hanging in there forever. And if you like this idea and if you like the video and if you like the subflow, please surely be liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Please leave your comments. How was the video? How was the idea? I would love to hear your comments. And thanks for watching video till the end.